All right, guys, how we doing? I'm going to give a few minutes for people to check in, and then I'll go ahead and get started.
Are you talking right now?
And just to give you guys a slight heads up, um, my wife is out of town, so I've got all my little ones today, and they might be running in and out of the house, asking some crazy questions while we try and have this meeting. And so I'm going to apologize in advance for that. We're just going to have to deal with it and work around it. Alrighty. Oh, give me one more second. Hold on. All right. So last week we talked a little bit about what goes into supply and demand. We showed how to draw the two graphs and looked at our equilibrium point where transactions take place, as well as looking at some of the things that can shift supply and things that can shift demand. I got to apologize. I never got those assignments put up. I will still put them up, though obviously you got a lot more leeway in when I anticipate you getting them done, because I don't want you guys to be overwhelmed. But I want to at least make sure that you put them up so that you have easy access to those materials so that you can learn this information, because this really is the crux of economic analysis. And sorry, I'm just trying to adjust my camera so that I don't get a lot of glare on the shot, because I've got really harsh direct overhead lighting. Okay, sorry about that. I'm not sure if I'm not sure if it went out or if you guys saw that breakup or how it's going to translate onto video. But I just wanted to, my internet went out on me for a second there. Okay, so now let's try a couple things real quickly to see if we can't demonstrate kind of the usefulness of try and demonstrate the usefulness of a supply and demand curve and understanding how to do some basic economic analysis here. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to look at is just we're going to draw a simple supply and demand chart again. And in order to do that, I'm going to try to broadcast my screen to you. And I thought I had more windows open. Okay, there we go. So here is my screen, and I want to make sure you guys can see it. So again, I'm going to draw a basic supply and demand chart. All right, so that and that. So here are our two axes, and on the x-axis, this is going to be our quantity, and I'm just going to put Q for quantity. And on the y-axis, I'm going to put P for price. And now we'll draw our supply curve. And our supply curve, of course, just to remember, when you're going from left to right, supply is going to be going up. And now we're going to draw our demand curve. And just to remind the home viewing audience, your demand curve starts with a D going from left to right. Your demand curve is going down. Why? Well, because if you are a supplier, as the price increases, you are willing to produce greater and greater quantities. And if you are a consumer, as the price increases, you are demanding less and less and less of a given good or service. Okay, so our basic supply and demand chart right here. And this tells the market two things. So one, it tells the market what the market clearing price is. So the market clearing price, what is that? That's the point at which quantity supplied is equal to quantity demanded. Okay. Oh, so you mean it intersects with the quantity line as well? Yes, actually it does, right here, quantity 1. And we can say at quantity 1, at that point, quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. So at this price, the number of products that are produced is equal to the number of products that are desired for purchase. In other words, the market clears. There's no products left remaining. And you say, well, that's a bad thing. There's nothing left. No, it's a good thing because everyone who was demanding the product had their wants satisfied. So that's the market clearing price, because the exact quantity that is supplied is also the exact quantity that's demanded. Now, in the real world, what's the likelihood of any price ever being the actual market clearing price on a large scale? I'd say it's pretty near to impossible. That's why we say that this is a model. There's really no way to know. I mean, I'm sure you can calculate it out mathematically, but what your market clearing price would be with some given information about your supply curves and your demand curves. The problem is because markets are made up of people and people have shifting preferences. The markets are then dynamic. People change their preferences. Markets change their preferences. So even after you've set a specific price, the market itself has changed to the point where you're no longer supplying and demanding in the same quantities as you were previously, which means that your market clearing price that you calculated is now based on old data, and the current data isn't very useful. which again is why here we're looking at a static model. This is a very simplified version, but it's still useful for doing some basic analysis. Okay, so let's look at some things that can shift our supply. And again, we're not looking at just a change in the quantity supplied. If we change the quantity supplied, all that means is that we're going to point. We're going to different points along the existing curve. Okay, and I don't want to do that. I want to actually shift the entire curve. So how do you shift the entire supply curve? Well, there's a couple things. Remember, it's the quantity supplied relative to the price that's shifting, which means that, and I told you guys this last week, the quantity or the supply curve is never actually shifting up and down on the y-axis. No, never, never, never. It actually shifts right and left on our x-axis. So just keep that in mind. It shifts on the x-axis as a factor of changes in price. Okay, sorry. Slight interruption there over some Halloween candy. All right, so let's take a look at some things that can shift our supply. What changes, what producers are willing to, or rather what prices producers are willing to deliver products at in certain quantities. Okay, so that can come from a number of different factors. Most likely it's going to come from changes in the availability of the products that they use to make that product. So for example, I've got my handy dandy thirst buster right here, Polar Pop, sorry, rebranded. Thanks, Circle K. But say, for example, sugar suddenly got way more expensive. Then it's not necessarily that Circle K doesn't want to produce as much or sell as much soda pop. They still want to sell as much soda pop. They're just not willing to sell the same amount at the same price. Right now, I'm getting those for 79 cents a piece. Chances are, after sugar prices skyrocket, well, now the cost of the soda concentrate syrups is going to skyrocket as well, which means that the price of my Polar Pop is going to skyrocket. But why? Why does the price actually go up? Well, let's take a look. Let's go back to our chart real quick. Okay. Oops. So if we go back to our chart, so now what we can see here is that it's not that the quantity of sugar or the price independently went away. It's that the whole supply curve for soda pop has shifted, and it has shifted it shifted a little bit to the left, okay, to where I've got a new supply curve right along this line right here. And so now you can see where before I was at this equilibrium point with that quantity and that price. Well, now because my inputs got more expensive and my supply curve has shifted to the left, well, now not only am I at that same price, if I were to charge the same price for that product, I would actually have to cut my quantity way down. But if I can charge this higher price that takes consumer demand into consideration, okay, now I'm producing at this quantity and I'm selling at this higher price. Okay, so we see if there's a shift in supply, if there's a shift in the demand, that's going to change prices and change quantities of production, at least based on what people are going to assume they should produce based on the market signals. Okay, let me try and clear some of this out of here. All right. So right here, we see prices go up, quantity goes down. Sometimes if we see a shift the other direction, if we were to see a shift, let's undo a couple more of these. I'm not sure I can undo any more of those. Okay, there we go. All right, if we were to see a shift the other direction, and for some reason supply went up, the cost of inputs was cheaper, the manufacturing technology made the cost of production go down, all these things might make the supply curve actually shift to the right along the x-axis, okay? Well, now we saw price going down and quantity going up, and that's pretty common when you see shifts in supply. When you see shifts in supply, the relationship between price and quantity is inverted. So if supply shifts and price goes up, quantity is going to go down. If supply shifts and price goes down, quantity is generally going to go up. But it's different when we're looking at your demand curve. So let's do one quick example with a shift in our demand curve. So I'm going to switch my pen color here to this purple, use a small pen, and let's say demand for a product went up at every available price. So we see a full shift in the demand curve. Well, what could make this kind of thing happen? Well, if something all of a sudden became very, very popular, for example, if a certain celebrity was seen in public wearing a certain style of sunglasses, chances are you would see the demand curve for that style of sunglasses become very, very popular. Well, now look at the relationship between price and quantity. Both price went up and quantity went up. So when you see shifts in demand, there's a correlation between price and quantity. When you see shifts in supply, there's an inverse correlation between price and quantity, okay? So when you see a shift in demand, they move together. When you see a shift in supply, they don't move together, okay? Which is really, really interesting when you take into account the power of the consumer in the marketplace. Because what most people tend to think is that businesses run the marketplace. And what that demonstrates is that it's actually consumers that have a lot of power in the marketplace. Because a business doesn't want prices to go up if quantity that they can sell goes down. And they don't necessarily want to sell more if it means that their price goes down. But if they can sell more and at a higher price, simply by shifting the demand curve to the right along the x-axis, okay, causing demand to increase, man, that's a recipe for profit, profit, profit. Well, what kind of activities can a company do in an attempt to shift the demand curve? Remember, demand is all about customers. It's all about the consumer. So how can a business try to shift the demand curve? That's what advertising is all about, okay? That's what advertising is all about. And also, you can sometimes a business will run into some negative publicity. Business runs into some negative publicity, demand for that product or demand for products for that business will go down, causing both price and quantity to be disrupted in a negative manner, something that no business wants. Now, quick scenario. I don't know if anyone's actually watching because you're not showing up on my screen, but hopefully you guys can see what I'm talking about. So let me switch back to my screen real quick, and I want to show you something. So I am a big fan of a new ride-sharing service called Uber. Okay, let me actually just go to a new screen. And let me draw this out for us again really quickly. So there's our price, there's our quantity. Let's shift our colors a little bit. There's our demand curve. And let's go with the red this time. And there's our supply curve. Okay, So I'm a big fan of this new ride-sharing company called Uber, partly because it kind of steps outside the government uh, monopoly over who can and can't give rides to each other. And I know that sounds like a ridiculous thing because your mom might sometimes feel like a taxi driver. Well, don't ever tell her to say that in public, because if she says she feels like a taxi driver, chances are she's probably actually breaking the law. Not the spirit of the law, but definitely the letter of the law. Okay. Because you can't be a taxi driver unless you are licensed by the city in which you're operating, sometimes even licensed by the state or county, depending on how your local regulations work. Okay. But here we have a basic example of the cost of a ride home. Okay. So we've got our demand curve, our downward sloping demand curve, meaning if prices are too high, consumers don't want to pay a very high price. But if prices are too low, then the suppliers aren't willing to go pick people up and give them rides. Again, at the other side, if the price is really, really high, then yeah, the drivers are happy to go around and pick people up, but consumers aren't demanding rides at a very high price, right? So this is how we get our little supply and demand curve uh, interchange right here, and we end up with a let me shift to green here, and we end up with our market clearing price right here at the equilibrium point. Again, if we hold everything else constant. Okay. Well, what do you think happens on a night like Halloween? Okay. On Halloween, people are out partying, probably making some really bad life decisions, and we can save our judgment on whether or not those decisions are good or bad, but chances are they're making some decisions that would make it so they would probably need a ride home, right? Now, something you have to kind of keep in mind here is that the market is not here to make moral judgments on people. The market is here to provide goods and services that people demand, not to tell them whether their choices are good or bad. We'll leave that up to them and their parents and their religious leaders. Okay, but the market is here to meet the demands of customers. Now, so if people are out at a party, they have a few alcoholic beverages, probably not safe for them to be driving themselves home at night, right? I would think not. So what do you think happens to demand for a ride home? Where before our demand curve was right here, this blue line that you see right now. Now there are more people in the marketplace who need a ride home. And because there's more people in the marketplace who need a ride home, now that you have more entrants into the marketplace as consumers, your demand curve is going to see a shift. And when your demand curve sees a shift to the left, to the right, let me erase a couple things real quickly. So I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm going to get rid of this old demand curve. I'm going to leave a few remnants in there so you can still see it just a little bit. And I'm going to leave that old equilibrium point in there, but you can see that new demand curve. Well, what happened to the price? Well, before, our equilibrium price was about here. And now our equilibrium price is about here. But there's another factor at play, because before, the equilibrium quantity was down here, and that's number of drivers on the road, right? Number of people delivering this service to customers. Well, what happens on Halloween now that we've seen this upward shift in demand? Well, now our new equilibrium point, sorry, that's way too far over. Now our new equilibrium quantity is somewhere right here in this area. So that actually is a signal for the market. Yes, you can charge a higher price, but you also need to get more drivers out there on the road. Okay, perfect. Well, there's a problem, and that is that even in places where Uber is a legal service, well, a lot of people don't like the idea a lot of people don't like the idea that businesses can charge a higher price just because their product is in higher demand. Think about what would happen if every business, if there was an emergency and businesses started charging a higher price for gasoline and for water and for canned food. People would be up in arms about that. But that's not a bad thing. It just goes to show that most people are economically illiterate and they don't understand the natural interaction between supply and demand. When you suddenly have less supply, fewer products available, and more people demanding them, the natural result is that the prices are going to rise. But instead, what you see is people demanding that the government step in and say, no, you can't allow the prices to rise during these emergency times or during these, what they're going to call price gouging. Okay, and so I'm going to draw this out for you again, but I'm going to erase some things so that we can start this over. Oops. Oh, and it's not erasing for some reason. Oh, there we go. Okay. You guys can't even see what I'm doing yet. Let me put it back on the screen share. Okay. There. So I'm going to erase this, and I'm going to draw what happens when people ask the government to control supply and demand on their behalf. Because you'll learn very quickly, it's not a good thing. It's not a pretty picture when you do that. So just to get us to our starting point again, let's draw our artificial demand curve and our artificial supply curve. Just because this is where we're going to presume we're starting up in some kind of somewhat equilibrium model. And all of a sudden, there's a big shift and demand for a specific product goes up. The demand for a specific product goes up, okay? And it's going to shift the demand for that product to the left, to the right, to where now my new demand curve is going to be right here. Well, what that does is before we had a price, an equilibrium price right about this area, and now I've got an equilibrium price right up here. Well, what would cause something like that to happen? Well, say for example, there was a hurricane. And if there's a hurricane and all of a sudden people need more gasoline for their cars, demand is going to go up. But there's another factor at play here, because the supply of available gasoline is also going to go down. But let's just say, for example, here, for this little sample, we're looking at bottled water. Bottled water, there's an incoming storm. Hasn't hit yet, but you know what happens when there's heavy storms. People start stocking up on some of the essentials, including bottled water. We see the price rise. And this is a natural market reaction, okay? That's a pretty standard thing. It's also a signal to the market to go from this quantity to this new quantity, to bring more bottles of water to the marketplace. Well, people hoot and holler and they clamor and they say, no, 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 you can't charge this higher price for bottled water in our time of need. Now, remember, the whole of the supply curve, or the whole of the demand curve, has actually shifted. This old demand curve is no longer there. People still want to pay prices as though they're looking at the old demand curve, but prices have risen, okay? So they tell the government their local leaders, their local officials, they say, nope. Okay, so we understand that you've got to have prices rise a little bit, but here's what we want to do. We want you to put a cap on the price so that this is the highest price that anyone can charge for that product. And that's called a price cap, or sometimes called a price ceiling. In other words, even though the market clearing price or the equilibrium price hold on. Even though the market clearing price is above the market cap, the government actually makes a law, a rule, whatever, to keep the price artificially low. Well, what does that do? What does that actually do? What's the real impact of that? True, the price doesn't go very high, at least not on the open market. But let's take a look at what happens. Where at this new price do we intersect with our supply curve? Well, at this new price, we intersect with our supply curve right here. And so this is going to be our quantity supplied. And now where do we intersect with our quantity demanded, or with our demand curve? Well, now we intersect at this point right here, to where this is our new quantity demanded. Well, all of a sudden, you have a whole bunch of people who are over here demanding the good, and guess what they're not getting? They're not getting the product. Why? Because the market has only received a signal to deliver this much of a product. Why? Because they can only sell it at this price. And so it's not worth incurring all the extra costs to bring product from other stores to actually pull the stock off of shelves in another store to move it to this store where it's in greater demand. And because businesses don't want to incur those costs unnecessarily, they simply don't do it. So what do we see? What is this gap from here, quantity supplied, to quantity demanded? Well, the reality is that those are people who can't get bottles of water on the open market. Does that mean that they don't want bottles of water? Does it mean that they don't get bottles of water? No, it means they don't get them on the open market. What often happens when you put restrictions, particularly price caps on goods, especially in an emergency situation, you actually foster an environment where a black market starts to occur. Because you haven't actually changed demand, and you haven't actually changed supply. All Are we back up? Hopefully we're back up. Okay. Well, I want to try this again real quick. Because this is not just regular products that you see all the time. This is also true of when the government bans things outright. So, for example, there's a kind of chocolate candy egg that inside of it has these little plastic toys. And a lot of them require some assembly. You have to put them together. And these are called Kinder eggs or something along those lines. Now, does that mean that nobody wants little chocolate eggs with toys inside? No, of course not. People want little chocolate eggs with toys inside. I know people who collect the toys. They're a big collector's item. And who doesn't want chocolate? And who doesn't want toys? Now you got chocolate and toys. Everyone loves them. But the government in the United States has declared that they're too dangerous to sell on the market because kids might choke on the toys inside the chocolate. So they've banned them. All they've done is they've said, they put a price cap at a price of $0, meaning you can't legally buy and sell those at a price above $0. So can you give them away to people? Well, sure, they're not against the law to own, but you can have them. You just can't sell them. And you can't, you can kind of bring them into the country, but you can't bring them into the country for commercial purposes. And this is, I don't want to say a totally harmless thing, because yeah, little kids put stuff in their mouth. I got 5 kids of my own. I know kids choke on stuff, little toys. I understand that. So it's not necessarily totally harmless, but it's a chocolate egg. It's a hollow chocolate egg with a toy inside. Okay. So is there still a market for those things? Yeah, there is. There's a black market. And people go up to Canada where they're legal and they smuggle them into the United States. And they sell these things at a way above market value. And it's a total black market. Okay. Why would they do that? Well, because they like the little chocolate eggs with the toy inside. And just because the government says that they can't be bought and sold at a certain price doesn't mean that people aren't willing to buy and sell them at a certain price. But now, because the government has put a block on them, they've put a price cap, they've put a trade restriction on those, now there's additional risk in buying and selling those little chocolate Kinder eggs. And so the suppliers of these eggs demand a premium. They actually are able to make more money selling them on the black market than they could on the open market because of the additional risk that they have to incur. So when the government puts a price cap to make it, to try and block this product from being bought and sold on the marketplace, one, they haven't successfully blocked the product from being bought and sold in the marketplace, and two, they actually make more money selling this product than they would previously. Now, the same is true of other products, other controlled substances, medications, narcotic drugs, other things like that. And this is not, again, this is not a moral judgment on whether or not these things are good or bad, or on whether or not breaking the law is good or bad. This is simply looking at human nature, the amorality of the marketplace, meaning it's not telling you what's good or bad or ethical or unethical or anything like that. All it does is it says, people want this, they're willing to pay to get it. I have it, I'm willing to sell it to them. Okay, that's how the market functions. So the price cap didn't do anything to prevent this product from being brought onto the market, or even prevent the product from being sold at a higher price. All it did was it created a black market for this product that shifted the power from the buyers of the product over to the sellers of the product. Okay, so I bring this up because this is how you see that a ban on narcotic substances at a national level or an international level, not only is it a failure at preventing people from using these narcotic drugs, but it actually gives more power to the suppliers, to the drug gangs, to the drug cartels. There are far, far better ways to stop people from making these bad decisions, because drugs are a bad decision. They will destroy your life, they will destroy your family, and they will destroy everything that you hold dear. But a government ban on them is actually counterproductive, and it's pretty basic economics to demonstrate why that's the case. Okay. All right, so let me just show this to you one last time. And this is our example of a price cap. Now, something that's important to notice, even though it's called a price cap, it's always under the equilibrium point. Why is that then called a price cap? Because what you're doing is you're saying you're putting a cap on the price right here, and the price can't go any higher than that before it hits the cap. Okay. All right. So let's draw another supply and demand curve here, because I want to show you something else. because the same thing is true with quantity caps, with quotas, or price floors. The same thing holds true. So here's our price, here's our quantity. Let's put in our demand curve and our supply curve here. Okay, pretty basic stuff. What happens if the government puts in what's called a price floor? They say that you're not allowed to sell a product for less than a certain price. When would they do that? When would the government ever say you're not allowed to sell a product for less than a certain price? Well, what if, for example, we were in there was a competitive market for, I don't know, let's say kerosene, a competitive market for kerosene, and you are so much better at producing kerosene than your competition that you could actually produce it at such a low price that you could undercut all of your competitors on price. So you could actually sell at an insanely low price. So you're selling way down here, right? And meanwhile, because of their production costs, your competitors are selling at a price right here. Oh man, you're killing them on price, right? Of course you're going to get everyone's business. Until the government comes along and says, if you sell at such a low price, you're going to put all of your competition out of business. And if you put all of your competition out of business, then you're going to have a monopoly in the marketplace. And it's too dangerous for you to have a monopoly because you might charge high prices. So we, the government, are going to prevent you from charging low prices now for fear that you might charge higher prices. And we are going to mandate that you charge a higher price now rather than a lower price now. I'll just let that sink in for a minute. So what they're going to do is they're going to put a price floor on the product. And the price floor, again, now is actually above the market clearing price. Why? Because the government doesn't want the price to go below that mark, which it naturally would if it were to go to the market clearing price. Well, what happens here? Again, the same scenario, right? So now where we're looking at our quantity demanded. Okay, quantity demanded. How do we know it's our quantity demanded? Because it's where price intersects with our demand curve. So here's our quantity demanded. Is where we're going to get our quantity supplied. Well, what does that mean? Well, what that means is the difference between this point and this point is now excess kerosene that you're able to produce, but you can't sell it. You could sell it to people, right? And people would probably pay a lower price. If you could sell at this point, you would have sold out all your kerosene. But instead, you only have this demand, and you have to charge prices at this supply point. So artificially encourages businesses to supply more kerosene than the market wants at that specific price. In the meantime, the market would be willing to pay a lower price, but for those who can't pay a lower price because of the artificial price floor, now they don't get any product at all, or they get less than they were willing to purchase previously. So we get these distortions in price signals. And when you get these distortions in price signals, then the way that it's supposed to. Okay, let me give you one more example here, and I'll explain why this is the case. So there's a great video that I'm going to share with you guys. It's a Learn Liberty video, and it features Professor Deanna Thomas, who used to be at University of Utah State. I don't remember. Sorry, I'll have to look it up. Both she and her husband were there, and now both of them are out at Creighton University. Creighton, I think it's Creighton, somewhere in Nebraska. Great folks, fantastic, and really well versed in economics. Both of them studied with fantastic people. They're great professors. If you ever get a chance to hear them speak, go hear them speak. Okay. But in this video, Professor Thomas demonstrates how, even though this is our regular demand curve for sugar, and this would be our regular supply curve for sugar, that would create this quantity demanded equal to quantity supplied right there, and at this selling price. Well, in 1984, you had President Ronald Reagan, who put a quota on the importation of sugar. Excuse me. So now it's not just that there's less sugar available, but it's that there's less foreign sugar. So do you think he put a quota above what the market was currently going to produce, or below what the market was currently going to produce? Well, of course, the quota is at a point below what the market is currently going to produce. That means that they can only import so much sugar, foreign sugar. Now, yes, I know this is going to actually have a shift in the demand curve for domestic sugar, and we could actually draw two different charts here, domestic sugar and foreign sugar. I'm going to simplify it right here and show you, well, it's a quota, it's the cap on the quantity, okay? Well, what does that do? Now this influences two specific prices. So this is the price of what? This is the price that people are demanding for sugar. And now this is the price that people are willing to supply sugar at. So people are willing to supply sugar at a lower price, especially from internationally. Why? Because if they don't supply it at a lower price, they can't get it out onto the marketplace at all. But do you think that's the price that the consumers are actually paying? No, consumers are actually paying this higher price right here. So what's the difference between these prices and all this quantity of sugar that people are buying? Okay. This is what you call a supplier surplus, meaning this is money that businesses get by creating an artificial price difference in what consumers want to pay and what consumers have to pay. Well, how does the marketplace, how do businesses get to exert such control over consumers? They don't get to tell consumers what they can and can't do and what prices they have to buy or not. Oh, yes, they can, if they can exert the power of the government and set certain quantities that the market can have available. It really, really distorts the price signals. All right, so let me switch this up a little bit. Let me get back to our main window here, and I'm going to stop showing you guys this so you can get back on me for a minute. The idea here is that a lot of times people see a price and they say, that price just isn't fair. I shouldn't have to pay that price. And the reality is, you don't have to pay that price. How do you choose to not pay the price for a certain product? Well, all you do is you walk away. You don't buy the product. When instead what people often choose to do is they say, that price isn't fair. And because the price isn't fair, or rather my subjective opinion of what's fair and what's not fair, because that price isn't fair, it must be theft. And because they're stealing from people, now I should get the government to stop them from stealing from people. So I can put price caps, or I can put price floors, or I can put quotas, production quotas, caps on productivity. and I can get the government to set all these fake barriers within the marketplace. But all those things serve to do is to distort the actual signals that the price is intending to send. Markets are simply one form of human communication, and prices are the language that markets speak. And so if you've ever played telephone with a bunch of friends, you see how along the way the signal gets really, really distorted. And it's so funny to find out what comes out the other end. Let me tell you, when it comes to distortions in price signals in the marketplace, that's not funny. Because these are real life and death situations that have to do with how we distribute scarce resources. And I'm not talking about scarce resources like luxury cars. I mean, yeah, that holds there too. I'm talking about scarce resources like food, clean water, clean air to breathe, okay, medications. And when the market tries to adjust for all these distortions in the price that the government puts in its place, it sends mixed messages to people. It tells businesses to produce more than people actually want. It tells people to buy more than businesses are able to produce or willing to produce. It tells people to spend money on this product over here when it really isn't all that valuable. So our lesson for this week, and I'm really going to wrap up with this, and I know I'm wrapping up a few minutes early, but like I said, I got a house full of kids that are totally unsupervised right now, is when you ask the government to intervene on the market on your behalf, what you're really asking the government to do is to distort the market signals, make it harder for people to communicate with each other through the market process. And I would strongly caution you against that, because as much as you might think that it's going to benefit you, it's going to harm other people. And you really, really don't want to do that, because the marketplace is all about fostering cooperation. And when people see that you're willing to use the force of the government for your benefit and to their detriment, they're not going to want to cooperate with you very long. Okay. All right. We'll wrap up with that. I'm going to throw some assignments on here. I'm going to try and get them up tonight, guys. Some short reading, some videos, a lot of good Learn Liberty videos. Professor Matt Zwolinski, goodness, I'm probably going to butcher this. I think he's at the University of San Diego. He is a professor of philosophy. He's got a great video on whether or not price gouging, even if it is immoral, should it be illegal. And it's going to talk a lot about the stuff we talked about just now. All right, guys, I'm going to check out. If you have any questions, email me, send me a text message. I'll try and get these assignments up tonight or tomorrow morning. If I don't get them up, well, enjoy your reprieve and go watch some Learn Liberty videos on your own. Thanks, guys. Take it easy.
Dad?